Ah, yes, friends. It is OGP, the One Giant Podcast on a Tuesday, where, of course, we are your host over there, Andy Makowitz. He's that lifelong generational season ticket holder for the New York Football Giants. And over here, it's going to be me, Adam Arbrecht, breaking down not only Big Blue, but also the Brooklyn Nets over on the Locked On Nets podcast with my boy, Doug Norrie. Sir, this is the day we've been waiting for. The rookie mini camps have concluded. And now we get into the ever impressive, the expansive, the informative OTAs.
Well, Adam, you know what? I'm excited today
Sure.
for two reasons. One, we get to talk a little bit about OTAs, but two, some of the OGP listeners said yesterday your energy was a little low key. You were a little bit more calm and quiet. They were wondering if everything was okay with you. So I just wanted to make
Is
sure
that
that we
a
address that at the top of the show. Like they're like, is Adam okay? Like
is that a real thing?
tell him to blink twice on the show if he is not being held captive. I just want to make sure the listeners we can get that out there really quick for you.
Is that true though? Because there is a reality when I was editing the episode back. Like I don't I think I didn't get good sleep. Like honestly, I think is what it came down to. But when I was going to post this to YouTube, I did have a moment. This is full transparency. Did not discuss it before, and I was like, whoa, buddy, what's going on here? Like I was in a low spot.
Listen,
Hey, you know what?
couple people, it's out of compassion and love for the show and love for you, just making sure you're okay. I can already hear it in your voice, as a guy that talks with you regularly. You're ready to go today. I'm fired up about OTAs too.
I love it. That's good. And as we've been saying all along, shout out to everybody over on YouTube that's been supporting the podcast and growing that channel. We of course really appreciate it. Have a specific guy that brought up a good point here for us a little bit later on. But as you say, high energy and ready to roll as we start to talk about the Giants OTAs getting underway here. And you said this when we were prepping for the show. There is this moment where you go, so what are the OTAs? Why are they here? Who needs to show up? And then we obviously have some of the dates that we're going to get into over the course of this offseason here. But it is one of those things where, like, the verbiage just gets thrown out and you're not necessarily sure where to set your expectations, not just from who's going to be there, but also how the information is provided.
Yeah, so I'm gonna take a step back really quick, and that was a good call
Do
out,
what you got to
Adam.
do.
Because listen, when you're at like a bar or like you're in a conversation at a party, and like two people are talking and they're using acronyms, and you have no idea what it is, but you're just nodding along. You're like, yeah, sure, yeah, totally, yep. Well, that's like kind of what happens. You have like rookie minicamp, OTAs, voluntary, involuntary, like no, it's not manslaughter charges. Like, what are we talking about here? And so OTAs are actually organized team activities. That's all it stands for. What that means is
Parcheesi, hopscotch, that sort of thing.
well, basically what it means is like you can use the team's facility and there will be team members, staff members there guiding everyone along. But these are all voluntary. But as we know, Adam, when you're in professional sports, voluntary is kind of like a wink and a nudge. Like unless you're a 10-year veteran who's a Pro Bowler that doesn't necessarily need to show up, a la Michael Strahan, like you should really be there getting continuity, especially under a new coaching staff. And the big difference between what Monday was and last week. Last week was rookie minicamp. And what that is, and I think Jordan Renan over on Twitter explained it best. It's like, where's the cafeteria? Where do I go to get my cleats? How do I get from the locker room to the field? Because you don't want to be embarrassed when all the veterans that have been around for 5 or 6 years show up a couple of days later and you're like walking in a different direction. They're like, hey, knucklehead, follow me this way. So really like minicamp is for all the rookies to just get accommodated with the facility. And then, Monday, Tuesday is when we really start getting into it where all the players together can start working towards common goal, getting some of that conditioning in.
Yeah, it's what they call orientation, right? It's like going to college that opening weekend when all the juniors and seniors are watching you stumble around campus, wondering which way is up. Going, geez, I mean, we got to deal with these idiots when I'm trying to get to my class. That's which isn't a bad thing though. I think players meeting one another, especially the rookies, right, developing their camaraderie, getting a little sense of the staff, right, having some people there. So you say, hey, you have a question about some of your equipment and you need to get it cleaned or getting a size adjusted, whatever it may be. That's going to be Bill. Bill's going to be your guy there, right? Like, and then listen, maybe if you're a smart rookie, you get to that cafeteria and you get to know the people on a first name basis when you're looking for an extra set of flapjacks there on an idle Tuesday. When we talk about just from a schedule standpoint, and then we'll get into some of the information coming out of it, and including, I think, again, there's always going to be these touchstones throughout the entire offseason of what is Joe Shane trying to accomplish here, and what is also Brian Dable and the new coaching staff trying to do too, right? These are the things that I think we see shift a little bit from one regime to the next. But OTA's offseason workout, so 16th and 17th, little day off. Then the 19th, the 23rd through 24th. Then they'll come back for one day. By the way, I love the breakdown of these dates where it's like, and then you'll come back around, and then you see you for a day, and then we'll come back around, and then obviously the end of May, 31st through the 3rd as well. The thing about it to me is when we were discussing this was you're developing familiarity, and we have been applauded on YouTube for not doing too much backwards looking, right? Trying to stay focused on what's ahead for them. But I did remember going back to last offseason and a player that's no longer with the team in Logan Ryan. And it was all the conversations around, well, what about this money? You just let dead cap and you got rid of him. Still a talented player. Why did he just outright basically walk from the team and you weren't worried about it? But he's a vocal leader, and that's important. The difference being that he got together, and you hear this all the time around the NFL, he was getting together with members of the secondary away from the team and doing some of their practices and working together, getting better, building reps. On the one hand, that's great. On the other hand, if you're Wink Martindale, you want as many guys in front of you as much as possible, as frequently as possible, as early as possible, to be able to say, well, this is what I like, right? And I think sometimes there's a little bit of a difference there when you have the guy that Joe Judge liked, that you liked on your team then, versus what Wink Martindale wants to be communicated. And if you don't feel like philosophically you're on the same page with a particular player who is going to be a veteran vocal leader, that's where I think you see this shift. And now it gives an opportunity for maybe a new voice, Xavier McKinney, right, to be aligned with Wink Martindale and start to develop that chemistry.
Yeah, we talked about this pre-show, and it was something I didn't even think about. But yeah, it's not anyone saying that Logan Ryan isn't a good guy or isn't a leader. He can be, but directionally, the Giants have been going in one direction, which has not been successful for a while. Year two of Joe Judge probably felt, more confident that Logan Ryan off to the side would still be able to preach and do all the things that he wants them to do. Where it's like, coming into this season, does anyone truly know yet what the expectations are for Brian Dable, for Wink Martindale, for Mike Kafka? Like, it feels like they need to put their imprint on this team first and foremost, figure out who their leaders are. You mentioned Xavier McKinney as one potential one, and then have them lead after they've gotten the direction. So
Yeah.
getting everybody into these OTAs all throughout May, as you pointed out from the schedule, Adam, it's important. All of May is voluntary. There's just different, sections of OTAs that they do. And then mandatory minicamp comes in June, and that's where everyone will be in the building, and they'll really start getting a lot of the contact drills and all that different stuff going on.
Yeah, and then you'll see the competition. You get a sense of this depth chart, right? Where are some of these names that we're hearing a lot about, holdovers from the previous regime? Do they still have a chance there? Some of the questions that people were bringing up over on YouTube too was like, where do you think some of these undrafted free agents slot, or or a holdover? A great question was that we'll get some information on. It's like an Ellerson Smith. Well, here's a guy you didn't get a big sample size from. When he comes in, he's basically fresh. Where does he get slotted in amongst those edge rushers, linebackers, right? Does he have a real chance here to get ahead of some other players? And it's hard to figure those things out, but you will flesh these out. And if you're a young guy, every single voluntary camp, every single time you can get in front of a coach and show what you're capable of is going to be critical. Obviously, June 7th to the 9th will be the mandatory one. But the other piece then to me was this. I'm labeling it as dispelling the rumors, because break down who was able to watch these OTAs before we get into the rest of these mini camps, and why it can be difficult to take little nuggets of information and not necessarily go, I guess we'll see.
Yeah, so it's exciting to see the news that comes out of minicamp. We all want to hear all of these guys that have been drafted or guys coming back, showing up in better shape, making athletic plays right out of the gate, gonna have, like right downhill all the way to the Super Bowl, right? That's what everyone's thinking in their head. But what we need to do is take a little bit of a grain of salt here, or understand why or how these things are coming out. So the first round of OTAs, I'm not sure if it's all of them, but at least this section of OTAs is only open to media members that are affiliated with the New York Giants. So basically, like, do you work for the Giants? Or are you officially like part of the media team for the Giants? Because if so, then you're allowed to be there witnessing practice. If you're part of like any other newspaper publication outlet, whatever, they'll basically hand you what happened and ask you to read it aloud, at a later date.
And our credentials have not come through yet, just to be clear.
Yeah, it's. I think it's
They
still in the
said they're in the
mail.
mail. I
New
heard it was a
address.
thing. Yeah, and it's a forwarding address. It always happens. We get it, and that's why you go with PO boxes.
I mean, full disclosure, some of the New York Giants actually live in my development, so maybe I'll ask them if they could just get a copy of it and bring it to my door, that would be a little bit more helpful, I think,
Try
just
doing
so
the
that we don't have
classic
to worry about the mail.
sidebar here a little bit. Why don't you do that classic thing? Oh, I think some of your mail ended up in my box, and just you can hand them something that clearly says Andy Makowitz and go, "Oh, I thought that read Brian Dable. That's on
Oh,
me. That's on me,
yes.
guy." But while I
Yes.
got you here, while I
Yeah.
got you here, but sorry, yes. So now so you know that only certain eyes get on them, and that's you. You said Bellinger, by the way, which actually, and I will give the one of the shout outs that I wanted to give here was over on Edward Squires over on YouTube, who said we have to get better tight ends in the room, guys that start with B, Bavaro, Boss, Ballard, Bellinger. So automatically by default, we know that Bellinger is going to be a critical member of the New York Football Giants just on namesake alone. But he's been getting a lot of this hype, right? And I think that we liked him as a prospect. We liked him when he was drafted. But do you think that this is a little bit of the, well, veteran tight ends ahead of him on the depth chart? It's kind of an open competition. Anyone could take it. And you go, maybe this guy's having one of the best set of OTAs we've ever seen in our lives.
It's been fascinating. Daniel Bellinger has been the star of the offensive side of the ball, at least for now. When he comes in, people are saying him running routes. He's a chiseled specimen.
Ooh.
What a mountain of a man. He looks the part. Like everyone's saying this, guy's running around in shorts and a
Yeah.
t-shirt, not even really catching balls. So they said, during the rookie mini camp, he made a couple of really good plays, a really good catch. And of course, as it comes out yesterday, the Giants come out and say, the one, towards the end of practice, rookie tight end Daniel Bellinger had the offensive play of the day as the fourth round pick made an impressive grab in the end zone.
Sure.
Despite his limited usage in the passing game at San Diego State, Bellinger had some of the best hands in the entire country at the tight end position, dropping 0 passes in 2021. So, like, while they're recapping what happened, they're also justifying their draft pick and explaining how
Right.
they noticed other things that teams didn't, where they're like, they underutilized him. We won't. He's making amazing grabs. Look at how good our fourth round draft pick is.
And by the way, like again, as the offseason goes on, can Bellinger be the second on the depth chart? Can you all of a sudden look at that room entirely? Of course you can. It's
Sure.
just one of those things, like you say, these are 7-on-7 drill. Everyone's low contact. Hey, looks like he's going for that pass over the middle. You're not trying to light him up, right? Like, so there's a set of circumstances here that affords them to have a little bit of success. And that's a good thing. The other name that got thrown out here too is Yusuf Corker, someone who we like, right? But as it was reported, this is a guy that everyone expected the John, wasn't going to be available, was going to go somewhere in the draft. So when you get to undrafted free agency, this guy is a steal. Now again, I like him, and I do think that he can be that. But this is that hard thing where you're trying to develop storylines, and that's great. I want to continue to see reps. I want to see the film. They give you some little snippets of what's gone on in these practices. The more information you get, and as you see the depth chart develop, that'll tell you where these guys are going to slot in. I can both like Yusuf Corker and be disgusted by the idea that a narrative is coming out of like, this is one of those guys, could have been a third rounder. Like the Giants got their starting safety.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why he was noted is because he made an interception that would have gone for a quote unquote big gain in OTAs, even though there's no contact, no tackling, none of this during any of it.
Joe
But
Shane was throwing for some big gains.
I mean, did you see the cannon on him? QB1 in Miami, as we talked about before. But it is interesting. The use of Corker piece was one. You can tell that the Giants are really excited about getting him in the building. He's getting a little bit more attention than even Dane Belton, who was drafted earlier or actually drafted, whereas Yusuf Corker was signed after it. But Adam, the other piece of it, we talked about Bellinger, but it feels like the Giants are really excited about the tight end room and what they're
Yeah.
doing during OTAs. I don't know what it is, but do you think, and I'll ask this question.
All right.
So they have Ricky Seals-Jones, they have Jordan Akins on the roster. Do you think that they're pushing up this tight end group of undrafted free agents and Daniel Bellinger, who was drafted mid-round, because they want them to succeed and they're really excited because there's not necessarily a 100% set in stone situation in the tight end room? Like they, as an example, and I'll turn it over to you. They talked about Austin Allen saying he was towering over everyone in practice. He is the biggest 6'9" human being in the room, like in the tight end room. He is that big bodied guy. And they went on to mention things like Andre Miller. having breakaway speed for a tight end, being able to look super athletic now at the
Little
tight
slow as
end
a wide
position.
receiver. Breakaway speed as a tight end.
Right, exactly. They talked about Jeremiah Hall, like, had really quick feet, which is like another thing that people were saying, is he athletic enough to be able to play the tight end position? They're really making it a point to highlight all of these different options at tight end. Like, what do you think the reason is behind that?
Well, again, because even from doesn't matter regime to regime, but we know what the tight end position has been the last handful of years, right? Inconsistency, tight ends that aren't able to block, that can't be contributors in all phases of the offensive game, right? So, in that regard, it's probably a narrative that Giants fans want to hear about. You want to hear about this tight end room, that there's these exciting opportunities. When you look at Bellinger, and you mentioned a couple of these guys here, some of them are fullback slash tight ends, right? Guys that you feel like can do some things in the pass protection game as well. And it actually ties into another point I want to make about an undrafted free agent. But when it comes to Bellinger, I would say coming out of college, looked at him as being one of the better blocking prospects in the drafted tight end position. So if he can showcase some of this in the receiving game, especially when we've talked about before what the offensive system is going to look like, spreading the tight end out off the line, not going to do a lot of inline work. But if you want to have that option, neither of the two veteran tight ends ahead of him on the roster are going to be guys you rely on heavily in that aspect. They are receiving tight ends. They're guys you want to get out in space. Aiken's probably more capable just from a size standpoint than Seals Jones to be a contributor in that aspect. But this is where I think Bellinger, he can overtake. And I don't think there's any, go back to last year, Evan Ingram, well, he'd been there. There's always the what if, the upside of what he could be. And then when you brought in Kyle Rudolph, again, here's a guy with a big resume, regardless if he was older, coming off an injury, much more impressive resume than anybody that they have on the roster this season. So there was some level of expectation. These guys have to be utilized, right?
Yeah,
I could sit
well,
there and say, if healthy, just quickly, if healthy, Caden Smith, right? He should have been out on the field a lot more. Not because he has a track record, just because I already know what these guys can or cannot do over the last couple of seasons. Why not give someone else a shot? That's what I think this is opened up for. And underneath Joe Shane and now Dable, that's what everything is opened up for. Hey, I like what I see from this guy. Let's give him more reps. Let's again, the baptism by fire. Let's keep feeding him, keep feeding him, keep feeding him. All of a sudden he breaks or some of the cracks in his game show. Fine, that's okay. He's still a guy we want to develop, but that's what you're looking to do is expose the weaknesses and maybe find out that some of these guys are a little more NFL day one ready than you might have thought.
so well, yeah, I believe that. I do also think that there's a little bit more at play here. If you fast forward a couple of
Like
weeks from
what?
now, well, Ricky Seals Jones has a contract. He's a veteran. You got to have at least one veteran tight end in the room. We can't have a bunch of rookies being across the line. There has to be at least one guy that has NFL
Yeah.
experience there. Ricky Seals Jones fits that part. He's got 350K of his contract, which is guaranteed. So that makes him a little bit more sticky than, say, Akins, who has basically no guarantees in his contract. I kind
Yeah.
of see a world where the Giants are going to carry three tight ends on the roster. It's going to be Seals Jones as that veteran leader. It's going to be Bellinger as the guy that they're looking to prop up. And
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be Austin Allen in that big bodied, creative 4th and 1. We want a huge frame in there to be able to get into the line and block. He also creates a different dynamic than the other two guys. And then you look at someone like Andre Miller potentially joining the practice squad as a developmental player for
Yeah.
the Giants, knowing that they let go of Ryzen John, Jake Hausman. Like, I'm already seeing the Giants like building up these guys in camp, knowing kind of how they want this framework to look like as we get closer to the season.
Yeah, I think 100%. Right. Again, skill set. We want to have a complement of players because, again, is this the best version of the Giants or of any NFL team? No, there's holes across this roster. So, how do we create an opportunity to say on this down and distance, this situation in football, we're going to use player X, player Y because they're capable of doing to the best, to the best capabilities we have on the roster, what we want them to execute. So 100%. I mean, it is one thing they went back last couple of years. It's like, put them in positions to do what they do well. Don't ask them to do things that they don't do well. I think that can translate across all of the NFL. One other note that I will just say here, on the blocking piece of it. This is the thread that I want to pull on here. Somebody, and shout out again, because I want to make sure we do this as much as possible. Something that we had talked about previously, I think, when they first drafted or first signed him, excuse me, as an undrafted free agent after the draft. Ed Milley over on YouTube, shout out to you, good sir. Thank you for the support. Mentioned how one of the other best benefits from a guy like Corbin is his pass protection. He is arguably the best pass protector at the running back position on the roster for the New York Football Giants right
Hmm.
now. And we heard that Williams looks pretty good, had a nice little one-handed catch for himself. That feels like a little Dable PR saying, hey, that's my guy. I brought him over. Why don't you let the people know he's doing good? This is where I think a guy like Corbin can impress over this camp because one area, and I'll take it from both sides. One area that Saquon Barkley has historically always struggled in is pass protection and blitz pickup. And I think that you can say, hey, he has to get better at it. Or you can say, you know what, this guy is an absolute elite athlete. He can do so many great things offensively for us. Maybe that doesn't need to be something that we try to force him to get better at. Maybe we just have someone else that can do it. And this is where I think Corbin develops that niche. You mentioned having a guy like Bellinger, good in protection, having a guy like Allen, big body guy for situational football. Situational football, if Corbin showcases over the course of this offseason that he can be relied on in that role, now all of a sudden, regardless of what the execution is going to be, he can be plugged in there on a third or a fourth and short, knowing that you can utilize him in all phases, which I think is really important. Balance, again, balance and consistency at every position with the options you have.
The other note that I think about Jashaun Corbin that I think is a little bit interesting here is he was part of a handful of players that also was doing punt returns at him.
Yep.
And so when you talk about versatility of the roster, if he can be a contributor on special teams as well as be that change of pace running back, as well as be a solid run blocker or pass blocker, like those are all things that you just keep checking boxes to say, the more situations that we can put you in, the more valuable you are to our 53 or 55 man roster, when push comes to shove. And what I think is interesting, Jashaun has shown the ability to run off big plays. We mentioned it a bunch of times. The
Yeah.
two longest rushes in the ACC last year were both by Jashaun Corbin. So if you think about getting the ball in his hands off of a punt return, he's already shown the ability to be able to take it to the house. They also had Wan'Dale Robinson as someone returning punts. I actually think Corbin is better suited because he's just a little bit bigger than Wan'Dale
Mhm.
Robinson. Sometimes you see those punt returners that are a little bit smaller in size or stature, and they get hit really quick and they can drop the ball or fumble it. I think Corbin might be able to carve out a niche, even though there was about 6 or 7 guys that were actually taking punt returns during the OTAs.
Yeah, in two parts of it's like really kickoff turn, punt return. I know you think about like a guy like Devin Hester, one of the greatest of all time, but I think sometimes like a Wan'Dale Robinson or any smaller backer receiver, when you think about them in punt returns, that feels different than kick returns. Like I want someone like a Corbin leaning towards kick returns and punt returns, but smaller size. It seems like punts usually, there's less you're dealing with, couple of gunners coming down the field, more likely to have a little bit of wiggle room, a little bit of space to work with. And then all of a sudden, if you're Wan'Dale Robinson, you're in the same kind of scenario of I got the ball on a swing pass. Now I'm working in space, right?
Yep.
And now again, for me, ideally, I want Robinson to be in a position where they go, we can't put you back there. You're just too valuable for the
Yes.
offense. So we really can't risk it. But Corbin is an interesting one because you mentioned it. I think this is again, we'll talk about roster turnover, right? Sandro Platzgummer was taking punt returns as well. And I only mentioned his name to say you have CJ Board, right? You have all these guys and new players versus holdovers. So a Platzgummer, you're saying, hey, buddy, if you want a real opportunity here, show that you have other additional value beyond the running aspect. You're 25 years old. You'll still be on the practice squad. Maybe you'll just be gone. That's neither here nor there, but we'll give you every opportunity to showcase that. If you're Corbin, I believe he's slotted in to be the third running back on this roster behind Barkley and behind Breida. But you can entrench yourself there by saying, oh, and I also can take care of the return game for you because just unto itself as the third running back, okay, how many reps are you getting on a game to game basis, right? How are you going to work into it? So anyone can increase their value here. And it's also how a guy like CJ Board, who we mentioned, the money it's not a big deal to move off that, even though you brought him back. This is how all of a sudden you start to thin out the wide receiver room for some younger guys you want to keep or players that you brought in. We mentioned Foster earlier in the offseason, right? Richie James as well. So there's other guys here that I think Dable, Joe Shane, like they want to turn it over. They just need other players to show that they can check certain boxes.
Austin Prohl, Richie James were two other guys that were taking punt returns. You could see that they're saying, if you're going to make this roster, it can't just be as the fifth or sixth wide receiver here. Like there has to be other things that you can contribute in.
Right.
You highlighted Robert Foster. The Giants did during the first day of OTAs. They said he had a couple of nice high jumping leaping catches from Davis Webb. So they're pumping him up as well.
Mm-hmm.
But to that point, that there are some of these wide receivers like Wan'Dale Robinson, Kenny Galladay, Kadarius Toney are going to be there starting. So if you're going to be a back end wide receiver or playmaker, you have to be able to be multifaceted to help this team out overall.
And there's one note I want to make about the offensive line here too, but just an extra point on that is it's also because it's not just, hey, be multifaceted. That's important. But when you can check two boxes on a running back slash returner, from a roster construction standpoint, it affords you to keep the extra player that is only one dimensional, that is only playing in the secondary and the defensive side of the ball, or the extra offensive lineman, right, that you'd like to keep in the room so you have a little more depth and a little more competition. So from a Brian Dable, again, from a Joe Shane standpoint, they're going, if we have three guys on the roster that can be backups on offense and also contributing, well, all of a sudden we save ourselves one or two more roster spots for a pure player. You talk about an Alex Bachman who's been on this roster, he's been around, but hasn't had a chance. Well, maybe because we check other boxes, we can afford to keep him around a little bit longer and see maybe if he could be a contributor. And that's probably a bad example of the wide receiver room, but tight end, right? Austin Allen, we'd like to keep him up here. And if Akins is still there and you're waiting, this is how you create a little bit of flexibility as you start to have to go through those cuts in the offseason. The other quick point that I want to make on the offensive side is obviously Feliciano's getting those reps at the center. That's where they expect him to play, looking for the first opportunity of his career to start at the center position. But Shane Lemieux was back out on the field for practice. And to whatever level we think his skill set is or expectations are under the new regime, I do think it's good from the standpoint of you have Garcia, you have Azudu. Shane Lemieux can be there, right? And in the old, well, if I think Azudu should be able to win the starting job, why don't I make it that not only does he have to get over a veteran who played 11 games last year for Arizona in Garcia, but there's also Shane Lemieux, right? A guy that showed he was capable of something. Whoever's going to get that starting job, I always like knowing that there was more competition and you overcame even another obstacle. Not, well, the veteran Garcia a little long in the tooth. We'll go with the rookie, right? I want to know that the Giants have brought in enough depth and competition to actually get the best version of the offensive line. Not like so many years prior where it was just, well, he's starting. Why? Look around the roster. You got somebody better out there, right? Why is Nate Soldier starting? I don't know. Look around the roster. You got somebody better out there. So that's a good sign. And it's just a good sign from a Shane Lemieux standpoint. Glad to see that he's healthy and able to get back on the field.
Yeah. So right now the Giants on the depth chart have Azudu starting at left guard, which is fascinating. They have
As
Shane
well they
Lemieux
should.
listed second, and they have Josh Rivas listed third.
He's
Max
in there, yeah.
Garcia is actually the backup center right now for Feliciano. So that's kind of the way that they're structuring
Yeah.
it. Which I mean, think about it. Gano is on the right tackle side. So like there's interesting little situations in terms of the depth chart there. But to your point, it's good to see Shane Lemieux back. We want competition at left guard. You and I both believe it's Izudu's to win, especially how much the Giants went up to go get him. It feels like they see something in him where they want him to build and grow with this team. Um, you know, switching gears to the one thing that keeps coming up for every single Giant fan is the secondary. Knowing that we
True.
lost James Bradbury because we had to release him to be able to sign all of these free agents and undrafted free agents, draft picks, et cetera, et cetera. What do you think needs to happen over the next couple of weeks for the Giants to not go out and sign a veteran cornerback or not go out and
Hmm.
sign a veteran safety to be able to shore this up? Because by every pundit media person's assertions, they think the Giants need to add a veteran cornerback. Whereas, is there anything that you think that can happen in this camp, or anyone or something that could go on where the Giants wouldn't do that?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, listen, we mentioned Yusuf Corker, and it's not that he needs to win the starting job, or we know single high safety, but you have two safeties on the roster. Xavier McKinney's one of them. Julian Love is still there. Dane Belton is now there. Yusuf Corker is there. So if Dane Belton, if we assume, let's assume the guys that were officially drafted have a very much an inside track to have a role for the team. Okay, so Belton's there. Julian Love is a little bit flexible. If Yusuf Corker proves over the course of the summer that he's capable of being there and being a relied upon contributor, not just, hey, he's a young player on the back end of this roster, that's probably step one. Step two has to be that I would say, at least right now, because you saw obviously when Cordell Flock came in, we know the weight, we know the size. Like, I just think that you come in at 165. I know we can blink of an eye. He could be up to 170, 175. He said he wants to add that weight. I worry a little bit about that piece of it. So I need Robinson to show that he's capable of starting on the outside over the course of camp. He needs to look to be dominant, but you need to hear a lot. If you're going to give glowing reviews, well, I want to hear glowing reviews that says Robinson did a great job on the outside working against Kenny Galladay. He picked up Kadarius Toney and was able to stay with him downfield. He has that speed, right? You probably need to hear really positives about him. And then even Cordell Flott, like I'd say, you need to hear that he's very clearly also entrenched over top of a Darnay Holmes. The weird part is, to your point about would you still add somebody? The problem is like, even if the new guys, and maybe and you put Robinson in there too, if they all check the boxes, but you also need to hear that like that Rodarius Williams looks really good and he's ready to be a contributor. He's just getting edged out, right? Or maybe he's beating out. We know, is he outside, inside? You mentioned his wingspan when we first talked about the secondary. Is he ahead of Cordell Flott, at least in camp? And Flott's trying to push to get some reps there at the slot, get into the nickel opportunities. Is Darnay Holmes getting beat on the depth chart, but still looking like he's getting some sense of himself? Is Julian Love still on the roster because he's doing good things well, or because you need to have players there, right? So I think you'd have to hear a lot of positives across the board to maintain it. And then, again, chief among them would be, I think, Dane Belton needs to show up and Yusuf Corker needs to be there, because I think they have a lot of value. Talk about the versatility and Wink. I know we're talking about safety, but you can move them around. And then Aaron Robinson probably has to. You have to feel like he's been listed as the number one, working really well across from Adoree Jackson, and the Giants internally feel really good about Aaron Robinson on the outside.
So interesting. The one name that you brought up with that I'm going to highlight right now, because I have a similar opinion, but one specific guy, and that is around Rodarius Williams. You
And I
mentioned
think he's your guy, right? I think he's your guy.
he is my guy. Giants.com has a podcast called Giants Huddle. Shout out to them. They do great work. Paul Dottino actually had Rodarius Williams on yesterday's podcast for them, talking about what his goals and expectations are for 2022. And you can just hear from him that he will not be outworked. And, he went on Twitter. I mean, he basically said, whichever way it goes, they'll never say I didn't work hard enough for it. Like,
Yep.
he is trying to get healthy, trying to get back, and he wants to contribute, and he's putting in all the work and all the effort. Adam, I'm telling you, with his size in Wink Martindale's system, in terms of his wingspan and his ability to take up large areas of space, like, I feel like if Wink and the team see that he is healthy and he looks athletic and he can cover and be a competent, backup cornerback too, or somewhere in that room,
Mhm.
you may sit there and say, all right, we have Aaron Robinson, we have Flott, we have Darnay Holmes in the slot, and we have Rodarius Williams, getting his strength back and getting together. Maybe that is enough. And I think that's the challenge for the Giants has been like, once we released James Bradbury because of cap concerns, we sat there and said, we have to find someone. We have to find someone. Why can't we just develop talent internally, get them healthy, train them up, and get them where we want to go, which is what you were saying all along. So for me, my number one answer on that is, if Rodarius Williams looks good, looks healthy, looks athletic, we may not even need to sign someone else in the cornerback room.
And I think the way, because Darnay Holmes is the big question mark just from a depth perspective, and maybe what ends up being is a veteran who's not a starter, right? Like we keep talking about like bringing a veteran that's going to be on the other side from Adoree Jackson. Maybe it's just a veteran who's in the room, but he's just a part of that group, helping coach guys up. And again, Jimmy Smith, we talked about that. I don't think the contract will be big, and it doesn't mean he walks in the door at 32, 33 years old and you go, well, he has to be a starter. No, it could just be, here's a nice veteran presence to help coach these guys up. So at the end of the day, as we've said, now we're listing two guys from the previous regime that, again, we were high on them when they brought them in. They both had injury problems last year, and that's why I remain high on them now. I think they were good prospects then. They should be good prospects now. And if those two guys show what we think they were capable of coming in last year, then this room looks at least a little bit healthier. It looks a little bit stronger. Still looks very versatile. A lot of mix and match opportunities. And you mentioned that I mentioned. I just go with the youth, right? Like, go with the opportunity to get these guys reps. It's so funny. I know it's a cross podcast thing, but we've been talking all this week on Locked On Nets about the young players, the rookies from this past season, and then projecting forward. And one of the things I kept coming back to was like, yeah, they got reps, but did you get them enough reps, right? What are you going to say now in year two going, well, if we had played him another 3-4 stretches over the course of a season, if we gave him another 100 minutes, 200 minutes, like what's the number where you go, and he's that much further along now? That's the thing I think the Giants want to avoid, looking back on at the end of this year and saying, boy, we didn't get Cordell Flott enough reps, or Dane Belton, or Yusuf Corker. If you think these guys are capable, put him in the room and let him have success, because some of these players have to be the cornerstones for the Giants. And if you don't start it now, it only delays the process. The best way to get better is reps. And the only way you get reps is to be on the field. And hopefully under Wink Martindale, Kafka, Dable, they said, show it, earn it, and you're going to be rewarded for it. And to your point on Rodarius Williams, it sounds like he's ready to do exactly that and make it next to impossible for Wink not to look at him and go, yeah, this is a guy that I want out on the field making plays for the New York Football Giants.
Yeah.
Closing thoughts here, because I ran a little long there, just in case you had.
The quick closing thought I had is I agree with you. I don't want to just go with youth for youth's sake. If you don't see someone in the future plans and you're just saying, well, a young guy is better than signing a veteran free agent, we don't have faith in either of them in our long-term plans. That's not where I want to go with this at all. Like, if there's a young guy where you think he needs the reps in order to get that experience and be the person that you want, I'm all for that. If you're just saying, well, do we really want to sign a veteran because we have a youth guy in here who knows what they're both going to be? That's where I kind of deviate from the plan. But I think you and I are both aligned on that.
And we'll talk about it. You can follow us over on YouTube. Obviously, subscribe, get the podcast to get those needs fulfilled. A quick little footnote. We've been having some technical difficulties on the podcast feed side that we're trying to sort out. So enjoy us over on YouTube. Know that we're going to get that ironed out so that if you're on the go, driving into work, you can just hear us, not necessarily try to prop that phone up and watch us on video in rush hour traffic. But we'll flip over during this week, I think, and talk about the defensive side. Because when you talk about young players, I think a lot of names come to mind, like the Tate Crowders, the TJ Brunsons, the Cam Browns, the Carter Coughlins, the Ellerson Smiths, right? There's a lot of names, the Ocean Ximenez, right? A lot of names over there. You go, to your point, yeah, if they're young and you think they need more time, I love it. What I don't love is being like, I don't know if he's that good, but he sure is young. Let's run him out there. So we'll continue to break down both sides of the ball here. There'll be more news and notes. You know, we're covering it all off season long. And again, we continue to appreciate all the support we're getting over on YouTube. And as Andy Makowitz would want, need, and nay, always demand that people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.